Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have Max Henderson from Kroll. Max, if you want to give a little bit of background on yourself and the company to set the stage.
Yeah, first, thank you for having me on today, Tony. So my name is Max Henderson. I'm the global head of digital forensics and incident response here at Kroll. Kroll is around 94 years old, focused on risk advisory, financial advisory, and specifically I sit within the cyber division, where we really respond to, for my team, different cyber threats, both advanced new threats, and then, of course, we're still seeing a lot of the same year over year, which is a lot of the basis for the report here that we're going to discuss today. So again, thank you for having me on.
Okay. All right. Well, so let's dig into the report. And the first thing I always ask when it comes to these things, like yes, I've looked at the report. I can pull the key findings, et cetera. But what I find interesting, and especially having been on the other side and having actually written some of these reports as well, is just to ask what stood out to you, when as you were looking at it? Is there something that surprised you, something that you find particularly interesting?
Yeah, I think it reiterates the nature of the landscape for security, where security is often retroactive to advancements in the IT landscape. And so we look at one of the areas in here discusses AI and a lot of the advancements in AI, and then we look at a security budget year over year, and oftentimes we're trying to allocate and really make up ground for what is very rapidly growing technical innovation. And so when that technical innovation really changes the landscape of a network, of a user's approach, there's often a shift rapidly to kind of adhere to, number one, governance, compliance, but also technology to defend, and then awareness to know how to respond to that. And so that is super important to keep pace, although it's very clear in some of the numbers for investment that while that focus has shifted, it leaves gaps in focus on other areas that still had not been addressed. So I think as we'll get into it, there's a lot of different areas that come as surprise that companies don't know that it was fully secured, and they've already moved on to the next phase, the next chapter in their investments on the IT side.
Okay. Well, so that is one of the things, once upon a time, I worked in the IT trenches and cybersecurity trenches and stuff. And I remember, I'd visit customers maybe after they had some sort of a malware outbreak or some sort of an incident. And in those scenarios, it seems like, the standard operating procedure in those scenarios is that all of a sudden there's a blank check to, buy some new tools to make sure that doesn't happen again. And because I wasn't coming in representing, I was coming in strictly as a security consultant, and I didn't have an axe to grind. I didn't have a product to sell. I was coming at it, they'd say, okay, well, basically, what should we buy? And I'd be like, well, hold on, let's take half a step back here first and figure out, what do you already own that you're just not using properly? What controls already exist in your environment that you just haven't configured properly? Because before you start spending money on other tools that you're also not going to configure properly, let's start with just trying to configure the stuff you have.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. And so you look at a lot of halfway implementations where what's intended to be a security product as well, if not properly configured, actually opens the door to broader abuse. And so right now, the very hot topic and the groups in the attacks is one called Shiny Hunters, right? And they're going after single sign-on. And so where single sign-on is supposed to be, again, a central focal point where you can control access, by actually getting through that, you automatically have access to a broader set of applications. And so to your exact point, full investment, full focus hasn't been made on that implementation to where now it can be abused to be exponential for that type of attack. So I absolutely agree with you where a lot of these products, and perhaps it's misconfiguration, or perhaps they have the product and haven't even considered using it at all. And so actually some of those situations where forensically we've gotten the best answers on casework. You look at gaps in data, sometimes the best solution for our analysis is a product that is present, not turned on in a way that it acts in its best manner. But as a result, it captured everything. And it says, oh, here's what we would have caught. And here's all this data to support it. And so it's been very frustrating for organizations to look at those where let's say, for example, an endpoint product is turned on, not in protect mode. And everything for the past months, it captured every bit of detail on exactly what a threat actor did. It was just never looked at. It was just never put into that configuration.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, obviously this depends on the software we're talking about, but I mean, even if I look at it like from my world now, and you say, okay, well, I do all of my stuff in Microsoft Word, but Microsoft Word does a million things that I never touch. Like there's so much capability in there that I don't even know how it works. Like I'm using it as a glorified typewriter, and so I'm literally just typing text, but like it can do all these things. And actually, going off the rails here a little bit, but when it comes to like the Microsoft Office products in particular, like Word has 80% of the Excel and PowerPoint functionality built into it. And Excel has 80% of the Word and PowerPoint functionality built into it. It's like you can use just one of those products and actually do all three things. But bringing it back to the point here, it does so many things that like most people aren't even aware of. Like you never dig into the features, you never even look at like what it can do. And I've had some things like just in the last, and I've made my living in Microsoft Word for 20 plus years. I had just last year someone was like, well, hey, have you ever clicked on this and then you look at this and then it gives you all this information? I was like, oh, that's great insight. I did not know that was there. And I think it's that kind of thing that like when you're buying a tool, you're buying a platform, like you implement it out of the box to do the thing that you're buying it for. But I think a lot of IT admins and security admins like don't take the time, don't really have the time to just kind of sit there and be like, well, let me read the whole user manual and figure out what this really can do. And then you don't learn until there's a breach, until there's an outbreak, and you bring someone else in and they say, hey, did you know that the product that you already own, could have done this and the other thing? And you're like, oh, that would have been good to know before this happened.
Well, and it's ironic too, because it works on the flip side where when you buy these tools and there's capabilities that you don't know about, sometimes that's actually exposure, unintended exposure, that's the source of the attack. And so you look at even AI right now, some of these products, these tools have the ability to open up some things that can be abused, things like APIs that can really grant access to powerful parts of the network. So yes, security products have functionality that we don't know, but also a lot of these IT tools have functionality that are open out of the box that folks don't know to secure.
Yeah. So digging into the report a little bit, one of the things I'm going to talk about specific stats from this report, but I'm going to set it up first by just talking about reports in general. I feel like every single cybersecurity report has some variation of, we asked 1,000 cybersecurity professionals, 95 to 100% agree this is a problem, and 25% are actually doing something about it because 75% think it's someone else's problem. It doesn't affect us, and so that kind of shows up here from the 94% of organizations recognize cybersecurity as a top risk, but 72% still report there's a gap between their business priorities and their cybersecurity strategy, and it's like. I want your insight on that because that's one of the things I find perplexing and frustrating is like, we've been doing this for so many years. Like, how is it that in 2026 there's still this massive disconnect of like, yes, we know that that's a problem, but we're not really dealing with it effectively.
Yeah, and look, at the executive level, it's obviously important to delegate, to trust your teams to perform actions. I think the disconnect here is where a lot of executives ask the question and say, are we good? Are we secure? Do you have confidence? And that answers a lot of times yes. And I think where the gap is between operational resilience and where security is checking the box on a lot of modern tools, as we discussed. But when it comes time to an incident, it's always a surprise to the non-technical executives what that actual operational impact is. And so when we hop on a call and start to discuss, okay, this happened, you may be down 3 to 5 days, 7 to 10 days, making sure that the cybersecurity team understands what is operational resilience. Let's say from the COO and the CEO and the CFO, right? What are the critical items during a cyber attack that we have to focus on keeping up, keeping running? Things like payroll. And so understanding that very little impact on the cyber side is necessary to have a large impact in terms of operational continuity. And so that's where business interruption comes into play, where sure, you may be secure from having certain solutions deployed in certain percentages, but the route to impact, the route to downtime may be a very short path to have significant impact. I think that's where the surprise and disconnect comes, is when those conversations are had, when they start to understand how long they might be down for in certain areas of the business.
Okay. So, I guess sort of playing off of that, like the report also talks about like differing, from company to company, customer to customer, or whatever, that differences in risk tolerance, differences in the cybersecurity literacy of executives or the board play a role in that disconnect. What do you think? Like, I feel like that has gotten better over time, but obviously it's still an issue. So, like, what advice would you have? Like, what practical steps can a CISO or a security leader take to try to, improve those things, and be able to have those conversations with the C-suite and with the board to, hopefully deliver better outcomes?
Yeah, and I think of course news headlines showing certain firms down for weeks at a time has brought awareness to it. And I think that CISOs and a lot of security leaders are looking at the holistic picture for their network. What is every single possibility? And so I think running through a proactive scenario, right? We always talk about tabletop exercises, but running through those scenarios where you define those critical areas of the business for uptime, and running through what is the return to normalcy in a shutdown event. Can we prioritize certain areas of the network? And so where a lot of organizations go wrong is when you have a massive event, the holistic network is taken down. And oftentimes it's viewed as a holistic bring back up, where there should be a focus on those critical areas and say, how can we focus on this subset and how can we approach it to get operational impact at a very minimal result?
Okay. When I started off by talking about the kind of like what stands out to you, like, part of that question is from when I was on the other side, like, basically taking a pile of research data and then saying, okay, well, let's make a report from this. And I think what some people may not know or understand is, that the report that you end up with is largely a function of like, okay, well, what was interesting to you? Like, I'm sure there was probably other data where it's like, all right, well, that doesn't fit that's not an interesting narrative, so let's not we won't talk about that one specifically. But it is a function of like, okay, well, what stands out? And also as you're there's so many reports, And there has to be an effort to kind of like differentiate it, like why should someone look at your report as opposed to 10 other reports from other vendors. And so you have to find a unique angle that says something interesting. There's stuff. There's something in that one that I found interesting because it's so high, was this notion that 96% of organizations in the survey say that they can quantify the financial impact of cyber risks. I think, I don't know. For me, that kind of goes back to what I had mentioned earlier, that with the disconnect. Like I think it seems to me that people that take part in surveys, and I'm sure I'm like this as well when I answer surveys, is there's a level of, I wouldn't say hubris. That sounds accusatory, but just like a cognitive dissonance of understanding the problem and not applying it to yourself. Actually, I would say that, like there are definitely things where I do that. Like I once upon a time, worked in like the investment and lending world, and so like I know how those things work. And I could advise you, not legally, not officially, because I'm not licensed right now, but I know enough to share that insight with others, and yet don't always apply it to myself. And I think that applies to a lot of things. And that's how I think of, like, with the surveys. It's like when you're asking questions about, like, okay, well, is ransomware a problem? Is your cybersecurity posture good, or is cyber? When you're asking about the problems, I think people in cybersecurity, they know enough to say yes, those are problems. And if they were talking to another company, they would say, oh, well, here, I can help you. Here's what I would do to solve those problems. But it's like you have like a blind spot for your own organization or your own actions, like where you don't perceive them the same way, and you don't perceive the risk the same way when it's when it's you.
Yeah, I think so. There's two different angles that really stick out to me from those numbers, and the one that we briefly touched on is the investment side. And I do think that the investment side is sprinting to be compliant with these new developments. So talk about AI. And number one, not having budget to then secure it, right? So there's compliance versus having advanced security of that. And then also the gap on the leave behind. And so when we talk about quantifying an attack, I think a lot of organizations understand the initial impact. It's that impact, let's say 1 to 2 weeks in, where things start to become existential, that people oftentimes don't fully appreciate. And so in scenarios where it's like, yes, as a business, we're not operating for 3 days, you can start to look at the revenue loss per day. But then questions start to come in if you're an organization that's heavily reliant on third-party vendors, whether that's for being operational or whether that's for your actual influx of revenue. And so you get in a situation where that vendor no longer trusts the security of your network. Number one, you're facing a scenario that may inhibit that go back live date with that vendor, or it may cancel the contract altogether. And so that's where, in terms of quantifying, I think that yes, day one they understand, but it's that down the road impact that the cost of a data breach really starts to add up. So I think there's a gap. I think that there is a lot of confidence on that survey. Yet if they were to compare that to the actual numbers and loss at the end of it, I think there'd be a great disparity.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. So then one of the other things in there is, this idea of race against the clock. And I think a lot of people are I mean, that's been a focus for years. I feel like every single year when you look at the data, the time it takes for a vulnerability to turn into an exploit goes down. The time it takes for a threat actor that gains access to move laterally goes down. The time it takes to exfiltrate the data goes down. The financial impacts go up, and all of those things. And now you throw in AI, both generative and agentic, in the hands of threat actors, and those numbers are going to get worse. And so it is, and I don't know, I think depending on where you look, like there's different things. Like the report talks about in 2025 the outbreak time was 29 minutes, and only 19%, so less than 1 in 5 companies feel like they're adequately prepared to respond within minutes, which is probably true. Might even be exaggerated. So how do what are we going to do about that? How do we deal with the fact that we are racing against we were already racing against the clock, and now the threat actors are able to accelerate with AI?
Yeah, it's definitely getting faster. I think the 2026 numbers, when those come out, you'll certainly see a lesser time even from what you're seeing now in 2025. So speed, certainly. The pace of the attacks are very, very fast right now. Again, we talked about shiny hunters earlier, very, very fast group. And when you ask organizations about their ability to respond and detect, I think still a lot of organizations look at themselves as the castle, right? How long to get to the keep? But the reality is the attacks are often happening on the edge. And they're happening in a way that you don't have to breach the walls of a castle, when there's other pieces sitting on the outside where those can easily be utilized for extortion type matters. And so the speed to take those over with the simplicity of a phone call with voice cloning, and then you get terabytes of data and then put a rapid extortion piece on the back end of that. It's a huge gap for organizations to get through when you start to look at the ability to just pick up the phone and call and not have to find a 0-day vulnerability to enter a network. So it's yes, AI supporting in a lot of different ways, but also the ability to diversify the types of attacks necessary to put themselves in a position to extort with just simple data theft.
Yeah. It's like it's interesting to watch how, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit to the, from the report to more specifically to AI. It is interesting to watch it unfold, because it's everything we, even before AI, like everything we do has always been a double-edged sword. And I've said for years, and Mikko Hipponen wrote the book, if it's smart, it's vulnerable. It's like every technology that makes things easier for us, or that enables us in some way, can also be turned against you. So it also empowers the threat actors, and so it's always been a race. And I feel like AI does accelerate that race. It makes it it makes it exponentially worse. But the silver lining is, well, we also have AI, so it also could make it exponentially better. I recently saw there's a documentary that was out in theaters recently called it's just the AI doc, something about an apocalyptimist. Yep. And it was good. I liked it. I mean, but it was basically framed as these like 3 parts. Like part 1 was doom and gloom. This is why AI is going to be the destruction of the world, and Skynet is going to kill all of humanity in the next 5 years. Part 2 was, this is why AI is the salvation of humanity and why it's going to cure world hunger and cancer by Friday. And then part 3 was, okay, well, what's the reality here? And I think part of the takeaway really was like, okay, well, are the doom and gloom scenarios plausible? And then, it's like, well, theoretically, yes. And it's like, okay, but so are the silver lining scenarios theoretically plausible, and it's just a matter of like kind of like ensuring that we maintain that balance, and try to stay a step ahead. Try to hopefully have a little bit more silver lining than doom and gloom. And I feel like that's the same situation we're in cybersecurity, is to say, well, let's try to make sure that we're using AI in a way that keeps us one step ahead of what the threat actors are using AI for.
I love this topic. I think the first piece I want to highlight is you talk about the doom and gloom. You look at all these proof of concept type of attacks, and it involves, you can go into the AI itself and convince it to output this, which can do that and this and that. And it's this huge, very complex chained attack, and it's cool to see. But the reality is AI can be abused in a much more simpler way. So you look at AI being implemented internally. You look at like MCP servers, and it's not even about being able to abuse the algorithms itself within the AI. It's as simple as you have this very powerful server, just in terms of its placement in the network, its privilege within the network, and its accessibility throughout segments of the network, where if you are to operationalize the server itself and not even use the AI component, by making the AI powerful, you make getting onto that server a very powerful placement to pivot off of. And so it's a huge target just to use as a base of operations, because you've now set this up to be a very powerful and all-seeing AI type model. The other side of that as well, and actually there's multiple sides to it, but AI itself can be set up in a way where it can be exposed. I talked earlier about API exposure. Some AI can actually open up APIs based on what you're trying to get it to do. So unintentional exposures through that, just to get to it, can be very, very powerful for a threat actor. But on the flip side of this, you mentioned AI as a tool for us as well, right? To keep pace. It is. Right? You have sprinting with AI on the front side and the back side with reactive. But I would highlight that security is reactive. And so for as fast as they go to pull off the attack, sure, we can go fast to respond, but they already have the upper hand just because we are reactive by nature in those responses. So certainly there's a lot of proactive measures to take. Again, within the report, we look at the investments around AI. There's heavy investment, but again, a lot of it's around the compliance side. And so getting visibility and proactively being able to monitor and understand how it could be weaponized, I think there's a gap there. And truthfully, the unfortunate piece is that by the time that that's operationalized, it doesn't matter how fast we are to respond, that damage is pretty quick. So effectively, we're left to clean up the pieces. So with great power comes great responsibility. If you're going to set up these AI servers in a very powerful way internally, make sure that it's in a method where, number one, it's difficult to get to, but also you have the rapid ability to contain that, even if you are in a reactive situation.
Okay. Well, and our RSAC was a couple of weeks ago, and I had a conversation there with someone talking about, I had posed the question, something to the effect of, well, our tools are designed for X, Y, and Z. What if AI does something we're not, it does it in a different way? And the answer I got, which I think makes some sense, I can agree with this answer, was the AI can, obviously changes the speed and scale of attacks, but that where we sit today, it's hard to imagine that the AI could somehow change the attack, the kill chain or whatever. Like there's still like the things that we look for from like an endpoint detection, and response perspective or whatever, are, in terms of like lateral movement, in terms of, file access, in terms of elevated privileges, like those are things that still kind of have to happen, for an attack to happen. And so like it changes the scale, but doesn't fundamentally change the kind of the how.
Yeah, and to bring this full circle, going back to the beginning, the simple attack, and you're going to hear you hear me all day say shiny hunters, right? They pick up the phone. When they pick up the phone, they say, I need you to enter this 8-digit code into Salesforce. And after that, they have full access to pull down data. So you can use AI to go shape up vulnerabilities. You can use AI to analyze the routes within the network, all these different components. But coming down to the human element and just picking up the phone saying, enter these 8 numbers into Salesforce, and they're off to the races. So there's always going to be a component outside of AI to get there. These attackers are very creative. They've continued to evolve as fast as our IT has evolved. So it's super important to keep pace with this, but always the areas where we super invest to protect, again, it's those other areas that we neglect that have been there the whole time, where they can just come right back in and pull off something very fast without even hitting the AI enhanced defenses.
For sure. I just got an email today, ostensibly from Facebook, which I don't even use that much anymore. But the premise was basically, hey, you've got a pretty big following, so we're going to elevate you to this, kind of like, creator class. And because you're in this creator class, we're providing like additional security protections. And so just need you to click this link and fill out some information. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to pass on that, especially because the URL was it was actually from, it wasn't like from Facebook, it wasn't from Meta, it was some made up URL. But the thing is, a lot of people wouldn't have that level of scrutiny. A lot of people would just go, oh, all right, cool, so let me fill that out. And that's the problem, that human nature problem. Whereas my human nature at this point, from years of training and experience, is to be very cynical by nature about those things. And my personal philosophy is to delete by default. If it's important, they'll contact me again. So like by default, even if it it looks like something that might be legitimate, I'm like, well, I'm just going to delete it. And if they really care, they'll find some other, they'll either send the email again or they'll call me. They'll find some other way to contact me. But this thing seems shady, so I'm just deleting it.
I plead the fifth on if I've done the same. But it's funny on the email side too, because you talk about AI enhanced attacks, and so the other area where it's just very, very simple is you look at people who do open those attachments and they do get phished and access is granted. We've actually seen where attackers have come in and they open up Microsoft Copilot and they just say, can you go find me recent invoices? And it'll go search, and it'll recursively search throughout all of the stored files. So here's all the invoices from this past month. And so effectively it's a sous chef in that manner, where it just enhances their ability to find what they're looking for without having to spend too much time. Was it the root cause of the incident? No. Could the incident have progressed without it? Yes. Did it enhance the speed? Absolutely.
Yeah, there's like a sort of a tiered or cascading challenge. There's like, well, so yes, someone got phished through regular human nature social engineering. Now they've got access to this tool. The tool isn't necessarily doing anything wrong. Like, it's not doing it technically, it's not doing something malicious. But one of the things that AI can do, and I've had this conversation a few times now, is expose like holes in your access permissions, like things that a human might not find. Like you hire someone and you say, hey, here, I'm giving you credentials to log onto the network. Here's what I want you to do. Well, a human basically is going to go to the links you tell them to go to and access the things you tell them to access, and they're not just poking around everywhere. And so they might not find that they have access to things they shouldn't have access to, but the AI will. And it will do it pretty quickly, and that's not malicious at face value. Like, the AI is just trying to execute the task it has been assigned and achieve the objective it has been asked for in the most efficient way possible. And it just happens to find, like, oh, hey, look, I have access to this folder that has all of the invoices.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
So there's multiple pieces there, and actually that part comes back to why things like security graphs or continuous threat exposure management, like trying to have a more holistic view of, like if you have a vulnerability management tool, yes, it's great at scanning your environment and finding vulnerabilities. If you have a firewall, yeah, it's great at saying, okay, this traffic's authorized, this traffic's not. But each of those things is only good at what it's good at. And you need the like 10,000 foot view where you say, okay, but how do all these things connect and orchestrate together? Because attackers are, at least good attackers are pretty adept at saying, okay, well, how do I get through the firewall, avoid the endpoint protection, like stay just under the radar for each of these things, and you have like living off the land attacks and stuff where you say, okay, well, I'm not even really running malicious. I'm not running exploit code. I'm not running anything malicious per se. I'm just using your own tools against you.
And it lowers the bar to entry for them too. And so actually some of those attackers that came in and used Copilot, if you ask them, could you go and pull off a full-on ransomware attack? The answer is probably no. And if you say, 10 years ago, it used to be the most advanced hackers were the ones that could code their own malware and have custom malware and get by the local security products. And now you don't even need any of that to be the most effective. And some of the largest ransom demands and payments that we've seen, very, very simple attacks. They knew how to pick up the phone, convince somebody, go type in and use that living off the land. And from there, find critical data, just copy it, paste it back, some of it. And they're off to the races. You don't even need these advanced tools. You don't even need to be on the deeper system that has all this defense in place and all this investment. None of it's relevant if you can live off the land and use AI and other aspects like you mentioned.
Okay. Kind of going back to the AI documentary, one of the other things that, like, so in most scenarios, I feel like AI is not creating something unique. Like mostly it's just accelerating the speed and scale. Like the things that it's doing are kind of the same as what we've been used to. But especially when you start talking about, when you get into agentic AI versus generative and, where it's actually taking actions, it's just when something goes off the rails, it could be a really big problem really fast. And so that speed and scale also is going to be heightened.
I would say too, with that, it's hard to recreate when it goes off the rails, right? When you're empowering something to go off and take these actions, sometimes the audit trail of every exact action that was taken isn't there. And so it becomes this doom and gloom situation where you're trying to understand, you're trying to recreate, you're trying to work off of what's there, because sometimes it's effectively novel with what it's doing to alter the environment situation that it lives in.
Actually, I just talked to someone earlier this week about kind of that very thing, that even if you have you can follow the decision tree and say, okay, I know how the AI did these things, and like we were talking about, AI going rogue, and saying, like, even if I can follow the trail and say, okay, I know how it got here, it's not necessarily repeatable because it's not deterministic. Like if you gave it the exact same prompts, you might get a different result next time.
Yeah, because the variables that it's working off of and the information it's working off of are rapidly changing and updating, these self-updating models. So yeah, it becomes extremely difficult to recreate those. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to be in a position where this becomes a more common theme for us.
Like related, and I didn't read the full story, but I saw the headline and my wife gave me some background, but there was a story I saw yesterday about a Tesla on full self auto drive that like crashed through a railroad crossing barricade and almost got hit by a train. And it's like, okay, obviously the self-driving AI made a mistake. but the broader context that I thought was interesting is that the driver of this car, the human in this car, like this wasn't his first rodeo. Like he apparently has 20,000 plus hours under his belt of letting the car drive itself. And this was kind of the first mistake. And so it kind of goes back to the, even after you've established trust and even after you're like, hey, I'm pretty comfortable with this, the car can just drive me around. It's like when a mistake is made, it can be pretty catastrophic, if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, I think in that scenario, every hour that's added on is false confidence. That's exponentially grown. Same thing applies to broader AI.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I'm going to kind of try to wind this down. So but let's bring this back to the report. So someone's reading the report. If they could only focus on fixing, one thing, with their strategy or executive literacy or response times or whatever, where would you suggest someone starts to kind of get the? I always approach things with that 80-20 rule kind of thing. It's like, well, what's the thing that's going to get them 80% of the way?
Yeah, I'm gonna ignore the 8% that said that there's nothing that they need to do to update their infrastructure or security stance. But that would be the first one that I focus on. But I think it's number one, understanding all of these investments as it pertains to budget and awareness. I understand that we're working off annual budgets, yet the evolution of technology is happening faster than on an annual basis. And so I would say leaving room here to account for those changes and where there might be operational impact. So just bring it full circle again. Whatever you're investing in here to create defense in depth, it is the totality of it where it's not being applied to business interruption and business operations. And so taking these investments, mapping that against what are your critical areas of the network to maintain operations during a huge impact cyber event, that's the gap. That's the gap between the non-technical and the technical, between CISO and the board, understanding what the priorities are to maintain operational status and how to utilize your investments. And the very first point that you made on this podcast was the existing tools that you have, maximizing those first, and then continuing to address things. This is never a one and done investment. This is a 365-day operational resilience situation.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to thank you for joining me. It was a great conversation. Before you just sign off, I will leave the floor open to you. If there's something else that anything else that from the report that you wanted to address that I didn't ask about or anything. But yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to join me.
Well, thank you, Tony. I certainly appreciate you having me on today. I'm sure before long we'll be back on talking about AI cars and doing forensics on what went wrong there. So I'm sure it'll continue to evolve.
Yes, always a fun conversation. So, all right, take care.
Thank you.